Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast.
And here we go. Today I'm joined by Chris Scaffidi, solopreneur at Fervent Workshop. Chris, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about a Fervent Workshop and what you do.
Well, I design and publish board games and card games, and I do a wee bit of software consulting on the side. The business focuses on software and games and software games, but I really focus in on card and tabletop games because it brings people together.
When you say card and tabletop games, you mean like the physical, like hands-on?
Physical games that you hold in your hands and look at with your eyes.
Okay.
Yeah, not through a computer screen or things like that. Although I do create computer versions of my games sometime, but that's only for the purpose of testing the games because it's a lot cheaper and faster to iterate digitally than it is with physical components.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you ever release any of those digital, like after you've released the physical?
They're available, but honestly, a physical game is a lot more compelling for most people once they experience it. Because it brings together with your friends, you're in the same room, you're looking each other in the eye.
Yeah.
And there are also things that you can do with a large table space that you just can't do very easily in a computer. Mm-hmm. Because you can have a whole bunch of cards spread out and look at all your cards and look at all of your opponent's cards. And look, you're suddenly using a couple square feet of space. And many people don't have more than maybe 1 or 2 square feet of space in the computer screen.
Right.
So you really can have a much more expansive and immersive experience with a tabletop game than you can with digital, which is why I'm not really that much of a software programmer when it comes to games.
It's nice that you have those skills, though, that you can do the beta testing
Exactly.
during the design. What does that look like as far as the publishing end of it? I know there's places out there that you can self-publish games by just ordering pieces and stuff. Is that what you do?
Well, some games will end up getting sold through websites where they print a copy for you on demand.
Okay.
Some of them get sold through print and play, where you download digital files and you print them yourself. And
like the consumer would. If I wanted to buy one of
exactly.
your games, I would buy the digital files.
Right, that's print and play.
Okay.
And then I get royalties from either one of those. And then sometimes, in fact, often what I'll do is I'll sell a large number of them through Kickstarter. And normally the margin on that is large enough that I can afford to buy more copies of the game, which then I stock. And one game is currently available through a retailer here in town. Others I just sell as people find out about my games, and then I just sell it to them. In a few cases, I work for or through publishers. Either they hire me to do a specific thing related to a particular game that they have, or in some cases, I design the game and then I license it to them and they pay me a fee. It works very much like books, for instance. So you get an advance and then they try to sell them. And when they sell them, then that sort of eats away at what they have already prepaid in the advance. And then everything beyond that is additional royalties. So there's many, many different revenue streams available to the self-publishing game designer.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
And different games sort of lend themselves to different markets.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, for instance, one of the games that's on Kickstarter right now is for a choose-your-own-path style of book, which is a game. So unlike most of those books where you just choose where you want to go inside the book and that's how you find out what your adventure is going to be, in this game, you don't get to just choose what you want to do. You have to succeed at certain dice challenges. Mm-hmm. And then if you succeed, then you get to choose what you want to do. Otherwise, the bad guys in the story get to choose what they want to do to you. Okay, so it's a book.
Yeah.
So it's going to be available in a few channels that lend themselves to that kind of a form factor. One of them is print and play. Mm-hmm. Since there's only one page you need to print, which is your character sheet. It's a role-playing game, an RPG. And all the other pages you can just navigate with a hyperlinked PDF in your web browser.
Okay.
Or Adobe Acrobat.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's a book, and some people like physical copies of books, so it'll be available through online channels for selling books. So this is not something I would offer, for instance, in a print-on-demand kind of context with somebody who specializes in making boxed games, because it's much more affordable to publish it through people who publish books.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the best route really depends a lot on the specific game. The game that I've sold or the game that has sold the most copies is one that was for an expansion of a big game that Stonemaier made. Stonemaier is a large existing publisher with a following probably numbering in the millions, and they needed an expansion for one of their games. So I licensed it, sold it to them. That's not something I would do on my own. It's their intellectual property, and they already have a relationship with that particular target market, namely the people who already own the base game. So it would be insane to try and sell something separately. I probably would get sued, right? So,
Sure, yeah.
it really depends on the specific game that's involved as to what's the right channel to do it.
About that specific expansion, though, how did that work? I assume you had to reach out to them and ask.
I did, yes.
Yeah. Did you pitch them?
I pitched them a spin-off, and they didn't want a spin-off. They wanted an expansion. So then when the time came and they decided they did want the expansion, they said, we like the ideas that you had for the spin-off, roughly speaking. They didn't want exactly that. Could you please bring those ideas into the expansion? So I was invited to collaborate with the person who helped design the second expansion to that game, and we together designed the third expansion to the game.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you had other types of cold calling,
That's the only expansion I've sold.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I have cold called a bunch of publishers about various games.
Yeah.
Sometimes they license a game. Sometimes they hire me to work on one of their existing games or a game they have upcoming. But that was probably the biggest success right there.
And what about all the art? I know that's a big part of games, the artistic design part of it. How do you handle that?
For that particular game, the art was done by an artist that the publisher hired to do it. And that's the normal thing, is the publisher decides the art, decides who's going to do it and what the direction is going to be. And then they're the ones who review what the artist does. And, if changes are needing, they're the ones who specify the changes to the artist. And they're the ones who pay the artist, too.
Gotcha.
When I publish a game myself, that means I'm responsible for the art.
Right.
In some cases, I take public domain work that's old, past, I think typically in the U.S., it's 70 years after the lifetime of the creator.
Right.
And in many cases, we'll edit it and bring it up to date in terms of aesthetics that people expect right now. There's art, for instance, in the late 1800s that was on postcards that have been scanned and put online. And so I've had to edit those, maybe make the colors a little bit better. Color making was not as vivid in media that are reproduced in large quantities in the 18 and early 1900s.
Yeah.
And by modern standards, everyone expects art to be colored.
Of course, yeah.
If it's not explicitly black and white, then it needs to be colorful. It can't just kind of be halfway in between.
Right, yeah.
So I've had to overpaint a lot of that. And as I've done that, I've gradually developed skill with simply handling artistic tools. And then that, in turn, has led me down the path of taking classes to begin doing art of my own. And I can't hold a candle to some of the best artists out there. I'm nothing. But one of my longer term goals would be to grow my skill in that area, because that will carry me into other areas beyond just game design.
You like games. It sounds like you've played them for a long time. When we met, you'd mentioned that you've not done game design like you're doing now, but you have always had that kind of in your locker where you've created.
Yeah, I enjoy that stuff.
Yeah. Things. I think I remember you told me a story about when you were really young with your siblings, and you were creating a little game in your basement with marketplaces, and
we each would have our own area in the basement, and we would set up a little store.
Yeah.
I believe we called that game City.
Okay. And
everybody would, I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, so people would close their store and then go around to the other stores and buy their stuff. And so it was a lot like Monopoly, but the goal was never to put the other people out of business. We were just doing this for the experience because it was intrinsically rewarding.
Yeah.
But we had another game. It was called City also, I believe.
Very original.
I know. I love city builders.
Yeah.
I've got one of my own. I can sell it to you if you're interested. But anyway.
We could talk later.
That one, we would take blankets, lay it out on the carpet to form hills, and then take wooden blocks or little boxes and put those around and use Legos to build storefronts for them. And then we would take our Matchbox cars and drive them around the city to the different stores.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you can see why it was called the same game. It was just a different edition.
Sounds like that's very much, it's more like a board game, but the mechanics of both are probably very similar.
Right. Both were immersive, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like immersive games, things that are extremely rich in terms of theme and player participation. Like you're participating with as much of yourself as can be arranged, not just your mind. They're not cerebral games; they're experiential games.
Where does that come from? The interest in that? Did your family, like obviously your siblings there, but did your parents play games like as a family?
They bought us little card games like Uno or Monopoly board game.
Yeah.
We had board games. I think we had one about the stock market that I played a lot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think our parents were unusual except in terms of being supportive of play.
Okay.
And that's really good. That was definitely a great thing about my parents.
So your love for games just kind of came from just somewhere else, or can you put your finger on it, or?
I don't know. I think everybody loves games because when you accomplish something, your brain releases a little dopamine.
Right.
It's just that not everybody's games look the same. Some people play social games in their everyday life in terms of how they interact with other people. Some people play commercial games or professional games. I mean, like, there are people who get this huge surge of joy when they're promoted. You know, and if they get promoted up and up and up and up, every time that happens, like they feel better about themselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, leveling up is not new to video games. People have been doing it in society for millennia.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, I think games are a safe place for people to come and have challenging experiences that they can't safely have in the real world, like launching a war against Russia. You know, you can have these safe experiences that are really challenging and interesting.
Yeah.
And so in some ways you can benefit from games in ways that you can't benefit from real world games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And you see it all the time, like just like the mechanics of like that reward too. Like Duolingo comes to mind for me. I don't use it currently, but I did for a while, and like they capitalize on that really well with like the little badges and stuff you get.
Yeah. About maybe 10 years ago, gamifying became very common in commercial products.
I feel like today it's like, you know, reached that like saturation point and like there's getting pushback. I know I will hear like, you know, news segments on how Amazon's gamified like their production line or, you know, sorting and all that. And like it's leading to like physical burnout through employees who are just like have bought into the gamifying because it's got that psychological element of the dopamine release, but then they're overworking themselves without even really realizing it and lead carpal tunnel and all.
I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Some people have accused the social media companies like Facebook of excessively gamifying their user interaction design.
Yeah, same.
And addicting people as a result.
Yeah.
With, you know, harm to the consumer and benefit to the company, which, you know, people may not have realized when they got into it.
Yeah.
I try not to make my games that addictive.
Yeah. It's a little bit different. You're not, yours is a play outlet.
Yeah.
Not a, you know, using the gamifying techniques to capitalize on people's labor.
Yeah, although I sometimes wonder if I would have graduated a year earlier from grad school if Catan hadn't been invented, just in terms of, you know, the amount that people, including myself, have played games.
Yeah. This is Settlers of Catan, the board game that's widely popular,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It came out about the time, a little bit before I went into graduate school, so it was still very much cutting edge at the time. And
yeah.
I still like the game. I don't mind playing it.
Settlers of Catan, that was like the shift to like getting like that more complex game to the masses. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so Europeans have a pretty long tradition of playing these kinds of games that are popular in the U.S. now. These so-called Euro-style games have relatively low luck compared to, let's just use poker as our baseline.
Okay.
Or Monopoly. There's relatively low luck in a Euro-style game. There's relatively low hurting of other players. So you're not going to put a bunch of hotels on any property with the goal of driving a certain particular targeted person into bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. They also these days have tended toward kind of abstract analytical structures in Europe. But in the United States, they've kind of, I'd say, developed. They have a depth that poker and Monopoly didn't have, in terms of the structure of the mechanisms, the complexity. But at the same time, in the U.S., they haven't completely lost this depth of theme. So you'll have theme in many European games, but in some cases, that's not the most important thing. In the United States, it'll be, well, we've got here a war between mechs, and now we're going to talk about how that works out. A great example of a modern American Eurogame is Scythe by Stonemaier.
Okay.
So in terms of luck, you get dealt cards, but other than that, I can't remember any major sources of luck. And the cards don't matter unless if you get into a fight with someone. You choose which cards you want to use, and you add them to a number that you specifically choose of your resources to spend for the battle. So you have a lot of control over exactly how much you commit yourself to the battle. Battles are, only one of maybe 12 things that are going on in the game, most of which are economic and are just you trying to build your engine. So combat happens in like 2 or 3 minutes when it does happen, and the rest of the game then goes on. And it's, a multi-hour game.
Yeah.
And then that's the game that I mentioned that was like, it's a battle among mechs, but it's not like a battle to beat each other down. It's actually a battle to use the mechs for all kinds of stuff, including transporting your workers so that you can do economic development. It's got this huge, colorfully illustrated board, lots of stunning art. And it was that game was one of the reasons I was inspired, actually, to try my hand at game design.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you go back even further and maybe walk us through,
Go way back.
Yeah, and walk us through what you did.
So I got a bachelor's in physics and math from University of Wisconsin in the 90s. And nobody gets a great job with just a bachelor's in math or just a bachelor's in physics. So I went to graduate school in physics, and then I found out a lot of the people who were graduating with PhDs in physics were not ending up doing physics. At the time, some of them were going to Wall Street, some of them were going to be software programmers. One of them went into the Peace Corps. And I was like, wait a minute, these are, really good scientists, these graduate students who are graduating ahead of me.
Yeah.
And is that what I want for my career? Well, that's not fair. One of them went into government and made weapons. So
okay.
he used his physics skills.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's really hard in any academic field to land a professor job, which is sort of the stereotypical path, but it's not actually necessarily the common path. So I left grad school there, and I went and became a software engineer. And it was the 90s, and there was tons of hiring going on, and it was really easy to get a job as a software engineer, which I did for several years. Gradually, that demand for programmers was so great that they were able to come out of high school and get programming jobs without even a college degree.
Really?
Yeah. Not necessarily, really advanced development roles, but just coding, basically.
Yeah.
The kind of coding that today can be done with an AI. And at the time, I looked at it and I was like, wow, I don't want to be competing against high school graduates, because I could just see the wages bottoming out.
Yeah, the market's changing.
Yeah, and so I said, I really do want to get a PhD, but what I'm going to do is get a PhD in software engineering, and then I'll be the one designing the tools that everybody else uses, or the processes and methods, what have you. And so then, just kind of like make one step up on the value chain. So I did do that. I became a professor at Oregon State University, and I did do a lot of research on programming tools oriented towards the masses, not necessarily people who do professional programming all day, every day, but literally tens of millions of people who write code, but they're not programmers. That's not their job description. These are people like scientists and engineers and even, teachers. They make spreadsheets, and there is a surprising number of bugs in spreadsheets. So I made a lot of tools related to that target audience. And as I gradually did that, I discovered I was having experiences, but I wasn't necessarily having a lot of completely new experiences. In many cases, it was get a grant, do a bunch of research and publish papers, get a grant, do a bunch of research, publish papers, and get a grant. And, this is what keeps the university in business.
Your pattern, yeah.
As a commercial entity.
Sure.
And I was like, okay, well, that's great, but I love getting new experiences. So I've kind of gotten to know myself that there's 4 things that make me really happy on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, what are they?
Exercise, socialize, create, and learn. If I do those 4 things on a given day, I'm going to be a happy person.
Yeah.
And, you know, like the amount of time I was putting into that didn't leave much room for exercising. The people I was socializing with were largely people like me in academia. Although I was creating, a lot of it was papers and some software tools. There was a lot of programming, and that was really good. And I created some academic programs, and that was really good. But that was mostly near the end of my time at OSU. And although I got to learn, it wasn't as much learning as I would have liked. Because in most cases, I was sort of like drilling down rather than drilling. Or
Yeah, it's very much niche-y.
Yeah. So, you know, working as a professor at Oregon State University is great. And for somebody who actually cares about creating new knowledge, probably the perfect kind of a job.
Yeah.
I care about creating new knowledge, but creating new knowledge wasn't in that list of 4 things, except maybe as a bullet point somewhere deep within learning.
Right, yeah.
And that's fine, you know. So I did it for a long time, 11 years, which feels like a really long time. I don't know, maybe it's our generation or something.
I was going to say, to me, that sounds like a long time too. But
it's a long time.
It's only the longest like single job I've had is 5 years. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also like-minded like you, where I need all that stuff going on.
Well, I think a lot of people in the target audience have an itch also.
Right.
They want to do something, you know, and then they get this passion inside of them. And for me, it's been board games. I've loved playing board games ever since, or card games, ever since the late 90s. I've played a lot. Not as much as I would have liked when I was on the tenure track.
Yeah, well.
Say that much.
Yeah, there's probably your time was getting soaked up.
Yeah. So I went off and did software consulting, and
So you left OSU?
I did. Yeah, I quit that job in 2020.
Okay.
And then I started doing software consulting and a tiny little bit of game design, and managed to license my first game in early 2021, I think it was. And gradually I've been doing more and more of that and less of software consulting.
Okay. Was that the plan when you stepped away from OSU?
That was the idea,
Okay.
you know, but plans develop when you meet the enemy, really. So I had this idea that I would design a game and send it to a publisher, and they would be like, "This is great. Sure, I will do it." And I actually had a specific game in mind. I wanted to design a sequel to it. And I designed a sequel, and I sent it over to them, and they said, "Yeah, that would be great. And we'd love to see you do the following things, and then we'll play it again." And so I did those following things. I put 3 more months into it. And then they said, "Well, we don't like those things. It's too complicated, and we don't want to license it."
And you're not getting paid through any of this.
No.
This is all on spec.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's when the light went on for me.
Yeah.
You know, after that very first experience, it's not that they were bad people. You know, what I was offering them didn't meet their needs. You know, so they made a decision that was best for their business. But the light went on for me that I need to be able to publish
Right.
because of all the things that the publishers do.
Yeah.
And so those are the things I'm learning now.
How do you start when you're designing a game? Where do you start with an idea? Do you model it off of another game? And you're like, I want to do a variant of like this type of mechanics, or
Yeah, actually, it's sometimes explicitly what the publisher will come to me with is they'll have a game, and it's okay. In fact, in one case, the game had won an award, but it was within like a certain context with a certain narrow group of people who enjoyed it, and they want to expand the appeal. And then I'll look at that game and I'll be like, okay, well, there are a few things that we can do here to sort of streamline it so it's more accessible to a broader audience without losing some of the interesting, challenging mechanisms that are so appealing, or at least maybe changing them, but in ways that still preserve their authenticity or their attraction for that group.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in many cases, I'll have a starting point where I'm specifically directed to look at this and, work from here. In that collaboration for Stonemaier, for instance, my co-designer had a specific idea that he wanted to put into the expansions. And so that sort of like was the genesis for the particular components of the game. And then as we looked at that, there were other aspects of it, including how those interacted with the larger game where there was room for innovation. And that's where I contributed.
Gotcha.
When I'm designing a game totally on my own, the driving factor is always the theme. So I'll be thinking about what is this game really about? Like, Is this a game about Christmas gnomes? Like I'm working on a game about Christmas gnomes right now.
Okay.
Or is it a game about goblins? Or is it a game about, like war or conflict or something? And that in turn will tell me sort of like what's reasonable for this game. So a game about Christmas gnomes, for instance, is it's a great theme for a family.
Yeah.
A family is not going to want to have mechanisms in the game where, mom and dad are beating up on the kids, and it's just like, you're losing, right?
Right.
Now in a war game, however, that would be perfectly appropriate, where
Sure.
once you make a strategic goal or undercut your opponent in some way, then they're suddenly at risk, and you just go right into that and just pound them and pound them and pound them until you win the game. And that's how those kinds of games work. So I really pay a lot of attention to the theme because it tells me something about what the human beings playing the game are going to want to experience.
Okay.
Yeah. And like goblins, the goblins, they're going to be passive aggressive, right? They're going to want to constantly be looking for opportunities to make money because people have these ideas when they come to the game.
Yeah.
Although you can't make something that's exactly what people expect because then it doesn't add anything new to their life. But on the other hand, the best-selling products of any sort they feel familiar, but they've got something a little bit different. So you don't want to completely overwhelm people's sensibilities and give them something that doesn't fit with what they're comfortable adopting.
What comes to mind for me is just like making a movie. A lot of movies that are made are similar to other movies, but they're adding something new.
Right.
I'm just drawing that parallel because
hopefully something.
I'm a film buff. So
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully something that your target audience is going to enjoy.
Yeah.
If you do it just right, you can have a cult favorite.
There's so many elements that go into it. You've got the storytelling, right, and then the art, and then just like obviously you're thinking of the broad picture, like you just discussed the theme and like who your audience is, and then just the mechanics, which is probably based on like a lot of math, I'm guessing, for most of your games.
Yeah.
But you have to put that all together and make something out of it.
It's this very, very, very challenging thing, especially, like just the design by itself is pretty hard, but then taking on the publishing is pretty hard too. That's part of what attracts me to it is that it's such a challenging area for me to develop as a person.
How long does it take you to develop a game, or is that so broad that it's a hard question?
I would say by develop, do you mean create, develop, and publish?
From very beginning to very end?
About a year.
A year, okay. So are you
And it takes some additional time after that, in most cases, to fulfill the game when orders start coming in.
Gotcha. Do you have a lot of games going on, like in development at once, or are you just one at a time?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of having 3 things in at a time.
Okay.
One thing for about 3 to 4 months that's sort of in the design phase where anything could change. Anything. I could change the theme. I could decide, we're not making a war game, we're making a family game. And then just, things could really change a lot. And then after all of the main components, mechanisms, and art direction are set, then the game largely enters development. And it's sort of figuring out where the rough spots are when people are playing it. What are they not really enjoying, or is there a better way to explain this? Or if this rule were changed, would it improve the balance of the game? That's called development. So that's the distinguishing characteristic between design and development, is that you can't just change anything fundamental during the development phase. And that usually lasts 3 to 4 months. And then the last part is more associated with publishing. And although I'll think about how am I going to manufacture this game very early on, it's during that last phase where I'm really specifically matching it to what different manufacturers can provide, developing marketing materials, getting it onto Kickstarter or in the hands of a publisher or something like that. So that usually takes 3 to 4 months also.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and then, from there it can be even longer. Like after I licensed the thing to Stonemaier, I think it took them a year before it was, through their own process of working with their manufacturer to get it ready to sell. And their process is to get inventory before they actually start selling it.
Right.
Whereas with independent publishers, many will take the orders and then manufacture an appropriate number for the quantity of orders.
Right. Like the Kickstarter that you mentioned.
And that adds, obviously, timeline to that because you need to allow the boxes to cross the ocean
Right.
from China, which theirs do.
So the licensing deals, do those last a long time?
They can be in perpetuity. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
One game I licensed to a publisher, I think in 2021. That one said they need to sell a certain number of games within a certain period of time, or the agreement terminates. And there also is a requirement that it have to enter manufacturing by a certain point in time. And then
you or they?
They
do. Okay.
So they bought the rights to the game, essentially, worldwide rights, for that period of time. And in the end, they didn't exercise it. So the license specifies it's just a contract, and it said, then all of the rights revert back to me, and I get to do whatever I want with it.
So it's kind of like in the film industry, they call that optioning a script.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know in the film industry if they always pay money up front when the option is granted, but I don't think I would grant an option without an advance.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you need to get paid if you're not able to use. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, although I do think in some other creative industries, there's more of an opportunity to take advantage of the creators because they're just so desperate, And in many cases, they'll just agree to do anything in the hope that maybe something possibly will work out.
Right, yeah.
And one of my first strategic decisions was to become capable of publishing for myself. Mm-hmm. And it was precisely so that there was always that outlet valve, so that in the end, if I decided it was better, I could just sell directly to people.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very smart.
Yeah. So it's sort of a slower trajectory of growth because there's so much more to learn. But on the other hand, I never feel desperate.
Yeah, you've got that net below you that you can fall into.
And I always can do software consulting whenever I decide I need more cash flow. Then there are people who want to hire me, and I've basically told them I just don't have a lot of time that I can dedicate. But if there's a quarter where I'm thinking to myself, I think I need more cash this quarter.
Yeah.
Then I just email them. I say, hey, what do you have for me? And it's actually not terribly difficult to just drum up, a couple dozen hours of work or whatever. And
oh, wow. Okay. There's a lot of demand there with the software.
There is because of the relationships at Oregon State. So I'm hearing a little bit of what's coming out of there, and some people are now struggling a bit to get jobs. And I think there's two categories of people for which it's hard to find jobs in software. One is if you're just really fresh out of school, you don't have a lot of work experience, and you want to get your foot in the door, you may not be able to get as good of a job as you had hoped.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons it's so important to get internships during college. Start building those relationships and on-the-job skills. And then the other is people who are far along in their career and no longer keeping up with the modern tools and not maintaining relationships with people beyond their own niche or clique even.
Gotcha.
And if they ever get laid off, if you're like, in your second or third decade, and you've been working at a really good company, and they lay you off because the economy's changing,
sure,
what are you going to do?
Yeah,
so that's the other reason why it's really important for people to stay up to date with their tools and stuff. Always be learning.
Yeah, you've been very intentional with your network is on the software development side and maintaining those. Gotcha.
Well, it's easy because there really are a lot of nice, good people out there, and I enjoy socializing a lot.
So it comes easy for you.
Yeah.
What was that like, your very first game that you're trying to put together?
I think when I started down the path of designing games, I didn't fully appreciate the amount of effort required for the things that the publishers do.
Like what?
Principally the art and the marketing. So I've seen lots of games that simply used clip art or used photographs that were run through a filter or something like that. And I thought, okay, this is apparently good enough. And it's not always good enough. So that's why I've been redoubling my efforts to get better at doing art.
Gotcha.
And I welcome someday when there's high-quality AIs that can respect the moral interests of artists and work alongside humans to create game art. Because I think they'll be really helpful, both for me and for the end users, because it'll get them lots of great art that they can feel good about purchasing. And I'm looking forward to being able to use AI as a publisher, as a moral trusted tool. AI generated art also is not technically as good as what humans are capable of.
Yeah.
But I do have experience trying out AIs to make art, which I then go and overpaint and touch up. And that comes out very nice.
So using it as a tool.
Yeah, so it is technically good enough to be used as a tool. It's just there's all these issues related to copyright, commercialism, and provision, that really need to get sorted out. And I think they will.
They're going to have to, because it's the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
The other big thing that publisher does is the marketing.
right. Oh,
And I'm learning that, I don't sell the same number of games as Stonemaier. And 99% of that is because Stonemaier is outstanding at marketing.
Yeah.
That is really the big differentiator between any successful business and an unsuccessful business is, do the people want to buy this stuff?
Right. Well, and do they know?
That's the first step, right?
Yeah.
Building awareness.
Right. What steps are you taking to market your own stuff?
I have found Kickstarter to be a useful tool. The fact that a game has successfully funded is a mark of its desirability, which is more helpful than not at getting other people interested in buying the game through other channels.
Yeah, so Kickstarter is both, it kind of serves multi-purposes. One is that it's creating funding, right?
Right, for the first production.
Yeah, but then it's also kind of a marketing platform in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's helpful. I think another really useful thing is playtest exchanges. So I've met a lot of publishers who, I mentioned, like some of the games I sell directly, but some of them I do as work for publishers or I license to publishers. So then the audience is publishers. So how do you build awareness among publishers? And so there, doing playtest exchanges has been useful. So publishers already have a certain game that they're trying to develop, that middle stage of the process, and they need people to try out their game and give feedback. And as a successful designer and publisher myself, people will send me games and they'll say, will you try out my game and give me feedback? Well, if they're a publisher, of course I will do that for you because I'd love to have a relationship with you.
Yeah.
Maybe someday I'll say to you, I saw that your game came out, yada, yada, yada. And maybe it was a good result. Like if I think they did a really good job with the development and publishing and I can trust them to use my content to make great games, then I'll say to them, I think you could do a really good job with a game that I'm currently designing. And then would you be interested in trying it out? So the answer to your question sort of depends on whether we're thinking of the end user as the customer or the publisher as the customer. I don't just do one of the two.
I was actually looking at it through the other side of the lens, not the who's your customer, but like how are you finding success as a solopreneur and being able to support yourself?
Yeah, so it's a mix.
You've learned a lot in the few years here that you've been doing it.
And there's a lot left to learn.
And I'm sure there's more of that mountain to climb.
I've focused on organic growth.
Yeah.
So as I've gradually grown in not only skills, but also the amount of resources that my business has, it's unlocking additional methods of marketing. And as I reach more customers, then I'm able to get larger numbers of units in my production, which means I'm getting economies of scale, which means the margin's going up, which means that I have even more money. So at each of these stages, where you're talking about basically what are called new production frontiers. Like there's this new way of producing the game or manufacturing it or marketing. Each of those ways has with it its own wrinkles and things to learn. So it's a continual process of learning. And I don't do it now the way I used to do it when I didn't have a ton of capital available.
Do you see yourself potentially collaborating or hiring other people, like whether it's to do art or marketing or one of the other many areas?
So I do hire people on a contract basis, 1099s.
Yeah.
I don't want any employees. Employment law scares me. There are just so many laws out there designed to protect the worker. I don't have a problem with those, but I also know that every single one of them is a tripwire.
Right, yeah, and you just don't want to deal with that.
I have a lot of things I'm dealing with. One that could land me in legal trouble is definitely something to steer away from.
Sure. Okay. Is that something you routinely do, though, is hire contractors 1099?
Yeah, I think you 1099 somebody if it goes above $600.
It is 600 in a calendar year.
Yeah.
But have you done that often where you're...
No, I haven't gone over that threshold. In fact, I'm cautious not to, because I don't want to have to go down the path of, oh, now I'm going to issue this paperwork, and is this paperwork correct and all that stuff.
Yeah, it gets...
Someday I might grow to the point where it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to rule it out.
Sure.
It works for a lot of companies, but it's just not where I'm at right now, hence the solopreneur.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're very, comfortable and like you're good where you are as far as just having your hands in all the pots and not really outsourcing any of it.
There's a lot to learn still.
Do you have seasonal dates? Are you ever looking at like, I want to release this game, in spring or something? Does that shape how you structure your year?
Yeah. Like I would not sell a garden gnome game in the winter.
Yeah.
I sold that one in May or August, something like that. It was a summertime kind of thing.
Yeah.
If everything works well, at the end of 2024, I think there's going to be a Christmas gnome game.
Okay.
And the illustrations are ridiculously delightful. Those are the ones that came from the postcards.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they're like there's these bears, and they're holding these gnomes, and they're together going to deliver the gifts. It's a family-oriented game, but it has two modes, basic and advanced. So the basic mode you can play with your family, and I think people down to 10 are going to be able to play it, maybe even 7. Mm-hmm. And then the more advanced mode is more for teens and adults.
Gotcha.
But a Christmas gnome game, that's a tough one. People don't really shop for Christmas products except around the holidays.
Of course.
But they want it by Christmas.
Yeah. So where do you feed
What I'm leaning toward right now, again, like if everything works out, is designing it in such a way that it fits inside of the USPS priority flat rate mailbox.
Yeah.
And end the Kickstarter in early December. And during the Kickstarter, like start stacking boxes and maybe even pre-address them. And the moment that the Kickstarter ends and the cash ends up in my account, then
they're at the post
all
office.
of them go to the post office.
Man.
And then they get delivered by Christmas.
Yeah, I can see your logistics mind working.
Right.
Yeah, right there.
I think that's how that one's going to go.
Yeah.
And so then everybody shops during the season and gets their thing during the season, and it's still on Kickstarter. I think that's how that's going to go.
Yeah.
Sorry, Europe. You're not getting yours by Christmas. I mean, really what it all comes down to, game design or game marketing or any of this, is recognizing the human being on the other side of the transaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thinking about what are they thinking about, and then making sure that you meet their needs and not just go down a path because it seems like, it's interesting or it's a passion of you. Like you're trying to meet other people's needs. That means you need to meet them where they're at.
Going way back to what I asked you earlier about like how many games you're working on at a given time, I feel like I know the answer to this, but I got to ask it anyways. Does that factors in to when you think you're going to release a game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't answer that question succinctly. The answer is 3.
You did say 3.
Oh, did I? Okay.
Yeah.
1 in design, 1 in development, and 1
Yeah.
that's out for fulfillment.
But you always have it at the forefront of your mind that's like, what is game X going to do and like when it'll be released versus Y and Z that you're working on.
Yeah.
Wow, there's so many moving pieces in there. But
Keeping it to 3 makes it simpler.
Yeah, but I mean, like outside of like you've got to think of the release date, you've got to think of the marketing, and then the art, which you touched on, the game design, the target audience, and just everything. And then there's the testing, which we haven't talked about a lot. How do you did mention that you sometimes make a computer version of the game for testing. Is that for so you can share it with other people remotely and then they can play it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, it's in a virtual reality. That's how you kind of, with various Zoom tools that are inside of the virtual environment, that's how you manage the fact that tables are much bigger than computer screens. And so you can navigate around inside this virtual space. It's serious. It's not nearly as satisfying as having it on your real table, but it works for testing purposes.
Do you have a dedicated group, like a group that you always go to, like, hey, guys, here's my new game. Can you test it? Or are there internet, like, forums that you reach out to? How do you find your testers?
I used to be part of some online groups where game designers would test one another's games.
Okay.
Typically twice a week. And that's fine. I mean, everybody needs to get testing, and
It's kind of reciprocal. You test mine, I test yours. Yeah.
It's good. And, in that case, a lot of the feedback you'll get is how you should redesign your game. They'll tell you all the things that they think you should change about your game.
Because they're game designers.
Yeah. And I mean, can you imagine, if I was an artist and I was painting a painting and other artists started walking by and told me, you should move the blue from there to there, or, I don't like that blue, you should erase it and make it red. Mm-hmm. It can be a good suggestion, but you'll probably take those suggestions largely for another different painting that you're going to do in the future and learn from it, right?
Right.
But you're not going to erase your canvas because you put that paint there for a reason, because you actually know what you're doing. So by the time that you kind of know what you're doing as a game designer, some of these avenues become a little bit less helpful than having regular players play it. So I think it was Apple once had a saying, your users are not like you or anybody you know. The point being, you don't just get a computer programmer to see, is this program intuitive? Mm-hmm. Because what programmers think is intuitive isn't necessarily what the end user thinks is intuitive.
Yeah.
And what a game designer thinks is intuitive and fun and interesting and satisfying isn't necessarily what the end user is going to think.
Right.
So it's really, really important for a game designer to have strong relationships with end users. And that is one of the main reasons why I self-publish. Even though I can make more money publishing through other publishers, they then would be the ones who have the relationships with the end users. And I've got a mailing list with hundreds of people on it, and I offer them the chance to play test my games. And I wouldn't say hundreds of them volunteer, but dozens of them are interested. And it's never hard to find somebody who is like my market, who is like my audience, who wants to participate. It's like having focus groups at the touch of your fingers.
Yeah. How do you get the feedback from them, though? Because if they're a mailing list, I assume you're sending them to the game room, right? Are you in the game room watching them play, or do you ask them for feedback?
Some of them I play with, and some of them I ask for feedback. So the first of those is called directed playtesting, and the second is called blind playtesting, and both of them are important. The second one, especially for testing whether the rules are easily understood. But one step before that actually is a very important point, to treat your customers as individual human beings. So I have relationships with all of the people who play test for me regularly. And so I have conversations with them. I don't just send them to the online playtest environment. I have conversations with them.
Yeah.
I will talk with them about which of the games would you prefer right now, given my needs and their interests, find an overlap. Send them print and play files in most cases. Sometimes we'll go to the online digital environment, but usually not for a blind playtest. Usually that's more for the directed playtests.
Gotcha.
Because they're remote, they may live in Nebraska or Europe.
Yeah.
And I think that this is really essential to maintaining the playtesters as a strategic asset, is that you have to treat them as human beings, not just an asset. Even though they do play a strategic role in supporting the development of games, they themselves have rights and interests and hearts,
Sure.
Any company watching this video who thinks, ooh, I need to start doing focus groups, will probably benefit from remembering that the people in those focus groups are people, and you want to have a relationship with every single one of them. That's what keeps them coming back. Right. And they feel a certain sense of investment emotionally in the result of those playtests. They want the game to succeed. And in many cases, they're among the first people who want to buy a copy. They really want this thing to succeed.
Yeah, they're vested.
Yeah, and so you don't want people who come to your focus group simply for the free pizza, right?
Yeah.
You want people who want to see you succeed.
Of course.
And you, in turn, want to see them succeed in the sense of having a really great experience with the game.
Well, you've put a lot of thought into your process.
I guess so. A lot of heart, I would say, because
both, yeah.
You have to remember, it's people all the way down,
Yeah, sorry. When I said thought, I didn't mean
analyze them. No,
analyze them and taking advantage of them. But
I try to be thoughtful.
You've been thoughtful in how you approach all of it, and down to treating people the right way too, and that benefits you, but also, benefits them too.
Yeah.
So, was there ever a point when you're stepping into this game design space where you're like, maybe I'll just work for one of these big game developers, like as an employee versus going out on your own?
I would do that. Yeah.
Was
It's really doubtful that they would want me full time, but if anyone wants to W-2 me, I would do it.
okay?
I would have to look at as with any job. Is this a company whose principles I want to support? Do I like the people there? Yada yada yada. All the typical employment decisions. But philosophically, I'm not opposed to being an employee.
Gotcha. Okay.
But game design is such a small part, or even game development is such a small part of the overall picture from the standpoint of a publisher that other than like Hasbro, maybe a few others, I don't think they generally have a significant number of designers on staff other than the founder of those respective companies.
Right.
Is often a designer.
I could see that. Yeah.
And in every case I've personally experienced, it's always been a 1099.
So what do you see for yourself in the future then?
In the near term, the biggest and most important strategic priority is getting better at marketing. And I think my weak spot in that area is probably awareness. Once people really become aware of the games and try them out, then they have good experiences and they want to keep, going deeper down that rat hole. So I think the biggest challenge I have is near the beginning of the funnel right now. Probably the biggest impediment to moving through the funnel is price. And so developing my ability to manufacture games at a really low cost is going to be essential. So those are two very specific things relating to the marketing and fulfillment aspects of business. Then the next thing I'm going to worry a lot about is art. I've already been making progress in that area. In most cases, though, I don't do the art myself from scratch, and I'd like to be able to do that. And I think the availability of AIs, again, technically proficient and moral use of AIs in the next few years will be a game changer. Not just me, but for a ton of indie publishers. And in the next 3 years, I anticipate a massive increase in the number of games being published. Because one of the by far actually the biggest upfront cost in a game is the art. And so as the culture becomes more welcoming toward ethical uses of AI in games, tons of people are going to be doing it, and that will allow many people to publish games who right now are being suppressed by the high cost of getting art.
Yeah. Okay.
And so since I take that as a given and I'm already a step ahead on doing the art, what I need to do is get a step ahead on the marketing, right? Because there's already, 7,000 or 8,000 or however many games come out in a year. What's going to happen when that's 20,000 games or 30,000 games? The person who sells a significant amount of copies and in turn generates a lot of value to people is going to be the one who can somehow rise above all of that.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to stay a step or two ahead on that also. That's really the landscape I'm looking at for my business over the next couple of years.
Gotcha.
Aside from this particular business, like I mentioned, one of the 4 things that makes me happy every day is exercise. And I'll just make a shameless plug for Orange Theory Corvallis. It's changed my life. It's changed my physique. It's changed my energy level. It is by far the best thing that I've ever done for my health. I don't know. Someday maybe I would like to coach as a personal trainer, or somehow be more involved or make some sort of a contribution somewhere in a fitness-oriented aspect of life.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like right now, but that's on my heart. And that may carry me for another few years. And then we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Who would have predicted what the world would look like 10 years ago?
Exactly. I've had a version of this discussion before. People are just like, you don't know what's going to...
You don't know.
The 4 things that drive you, I feel like it's going to lead you to doing things that you can't even foresee at the moment. So
I think that's true. Probably for both of us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. For me as well. But that's what's fun about it, right? Yeah. What advice would you have for anyone who is considering a bossless path?
One is the importance of remembering that you're serving human beings. So remembering the humanity of the people that you're designing a product or service for,
Yeah.
and then delivering it also. It's not about the product in the end. It's really easy to get wrapped up in the thing that we're doing. And if you do that, then you become more inward focused.
Yeah.
Customer service is a cliche, right? And it's automated by AI. But customer service used to be, I guess, all about understanding the needs of the human being. It wasn't a department that you could refer people to, but it was really about understanding and relating to people. And if you lose that, I think you're kind of putting yourself at a disadvantage as an entrepreneur. Because if you really remember that there are people on the other side, then you never have to look at yourself in the mirror and wonder, who have I become? And constantly question yourself that way. And if you remember that the human beings are on the other side and you actually have relationships with those human beings, then when you come to those forks in the road and you can't decide which of the following is going to more effectively grow my business, you can think about, what do the people need?
Right.
You really understand where their hearts are in their lives, and then make something that satisfies those needs. And that will be instrumental for growing your business also. So I think that relationship with humans on the other side of the coin, the other side of the transaction, is super important. Don't just treat it as, people coming through your storefront, you give them a thing and they give you your money. You do that, you may find some success, but you might also question yourself, and it may not be the success that you were hoping for.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Great. Where can people find you? Find your games if they're interested in playing them, or just learn more about that?
So to learn more about all of the games that I design and get links to go and either try them out, watch videos about them, or purchase a copy, go to ferventworkshop.com, Fervent workshop.com. Or you can just email me, info@ferventworkshop.com. And I would love to share what we've been doing.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you got a lot of games for people to check out. Well, Chris, thank you for your time. This has been a great conversation.
My pleasure. Glad to be able to come in.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. And there you have it. This has been a fantastic conversation with Chris, learning about all that he does. And for me, it's been personally interesting, learning about a little bit behind what goes into board game design, card game design, and all that, because I've always enjoyed playing them, and it's just kind of cool to see what's behind the curtain. And if you're interested in hearing more conversations with self-employed people like Chris, then please subscribe, follow the podcast. Until then, this has been the Bossless Path. Catch you next time.